Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we're your hosts. We have the fabulous Kirsha Fox. She is the author of Son of Deception and The White Leaf Child. She's a homeschooling mom of four, avid reader, and gamer.
And my co-host is Julia J.K. Allen, editor, author, and author coach. She's a fantasy and horror author who loves to put magic in everything. Thank you so much for joining us. We have guest Jason Dorough tonight. He's an author and voiceover artist living in Central Florida. He's the creator of the Gaslamp epic fantasy Teshover series and has become notorious for writing his first drafts in Comic Sans. Welcome, Jason.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So tell us a little bit about your writing journey. What got you started?
Oh gosh, I have always loved the act of storytelling. When I was a kid, I would make up these full narratives with my action figures and would tell my friends stories at lunchtime. And I was always a really avid reader. Also, when I was little, I got into to Agatha Christie and to British mystery stuff, and then eventually decided I wanted to write my own stories. And so I started out writing that kind of stuff. I was like a 10-year-old American kid trying to write like a 60-year-old British woman and going through all that. But and so I continued writing and pursuing that all the way through high school until I went to college. I went to college at Georgia Tech for computer science and learned there that I didn't want to do computer science, even though I got the degree. But while I was there, because it was a technical kind of experience, it sort of squashed the creativity out of me for a few years. And so it took some time to get back into writing after I graduated. But after I did, I eventually got serious about it and really started pursuing it and got serious about publishing, and that brought me up to current.
Wonderful journey. I'm curious, how did you get out of kind of that funk of like the no creativity once that had kind of reared its ugly head?
Yeah, it started when I started to school there, and I was doing all the programming things. And I think this is kind of funny because Brandon Sanderson has actually talked about this as well, that the part of your brain that you use for storytelling and for writing creatively is kind of the same part of your brain that does computer programming and that kind of thing. And when you do too much work with that, it kind of tires out the other one, and you don't feel as inspired and don't feel like you can do as much. So I think that kind of got squashed down for a while. And then when I finally graduated, got out of college, I didn't start writing again right away. It was still many years later that I started, but I still loved reading. I loved consuming all kinds of media and was always inspired by stories. And finally, through a series of things happening in my life, I started realizing that what I really wanted in my life dream was to be an author. And if I didn't do it now, I would never do it. And so it just took realizing that and sort of buckling down and just getting really serious about the writing to get back into it.
Sure. I love that answer. So you started with the mysteries, the British style mysteries. What genres? So you write Gaslamp. Now, yes. Tell us a little bit about that genre and why you chose it.
Yeah, so like I said, I was originally into mysteries when I was younger and thought that I was going to be a mystery author. And then by the time I got back into writing and was really pursuing it seriously after college and after a lot of life had happened, more of the fiction that I was consuming was speculative fiction, like sci-fi and fantasy of different subgenres and those kinds of things. And so that just kind of naturally became the kinds of stories that I was coming up with. And I feel like I kind of fell accidentally into fantasy. I love fantasy, but had never really planned to direct myself towards writing it. But those kinds of stories came to me. And as far as the Gaslamp thing, that's more just sort of the setting of the world that I've been writing in. I have all the books that I have out so far are Gaslamp fantasy that are set in they're set in my own world of Teshovar, but they are kind of a Victorian kind of aesthetic combined with some medieval stuff. But the book that I'm writing right now is actually a historical fantasy that is not in a separate world. It's set on Earth in a period of history, and so it's not actually Gaslamp. So I'm playing with genres a little bit. And I think with the fantasy that I write, it does have, it's definitely heavily fantasy, but it has elements of some of that mystery stuff in it still, even some elements of horror. And I kind of sometimes accidentally slip into sort of literary kind of stuff as well, whatever that means.
Right.
I enjoy playing with themes and trying to make just overall human stories that have the sort of the fantastical stuff built around it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Right up my alley too. I'm not super familiar with the gas lamp. I feel like it's kind of similar vein to steampunk in a way, but like a little bit. Obviously, each genre is different.
Yeah.
Right.
If you think of more like Sherlock, you know, with the long coats
Okay.
and the top hats
Yeah.
and the like the early technology, but you still have horses. It's sort of a very fun period of time to read about and
Sure.
play with because there was like this big burst of innovation happening, but you had like a
Right.
lot of like snake oil salesmen and just it's a lot of fun. It's a very fun time to insert just a little bit of magic into to really
Yes.
bring
That's a
it
great
to
way to
life.
describe it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I can
No, I
totally
love
relate to what you mean, where it's hard to put your genre into like one box.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because it's the same with mine. I'm like, well, it's some mystery. It's definitely fantasy. It's definitely adventure. There's some romance, but it's not really the thing, but like it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like 20 minutes later, like people asked you one question and
You're still struggling to describe
and
your
you're
book
still
at the
trying
end
to
of it.
define
Yeah.
your genre.
Yeah.
So
That's
a
why
little bit of everything. All the good
when
stuff.
I need to describe myself, I usually just say I'm a fantasy author, but then I always want to qualify it and I have to stop myself. Like they don't want to know that much.
Yes.
Right. The casual conversation. They're just making small talk.
Yes.
Right.
It's
We
like
can
when
go
people
on about
ask
our
if
books
you're
forever.
fine. You're like, are you
Yeah.
asking to be polite or do you really want the long answer? Like
Exactly.
Right. Short
how
or
in the
long
books
answer.
are you? I could go on at length.
Right.
Oh my gosh, that's too funny.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about your writing process. How do you go from like ideas to finished draft?
Yeah, so I get ideas all the time. I get more ideas than I will ever have the time to write, which is kind of frustrating because I want to write all these stories and create all this stuff. But what I do when I get ideas is I kind of let them percolate for a while. I just kind of keep them in my brain and work on other stuff. And the ones that survive that process, that are still there, that I'm still thinking about when I come back around to them, are the ones that I feel like are worth writing. And I'm a really big outliner. I will take those ideas and I'll brainstorm the ideas down. So I'll get them on the computer or on my tablet or something. And then I'll work to figure out what the shape of the story is going to be. I try to figure out the structure for this one and fit things into it. And I go through just a really big iterative outlining process so that by the time I actually start drafting the first words of the actual story, I have the outline set down to a detailed scene and chapter level. I know exactly what's going to happen from one scene to the next, so that when I sit down to write each time and have each writing session, I basically have almost like a checklist of things that need to happen in that scene. I know what characters need to be there, what conversations need to happen, and what it leads to. And so each time I am drafting, I'm basically just following a blueprint that I've already put together. So I'm definitely a big time outliner. I can't do discovery writing or pantsing at all. I've tried that before and it doesn't work at all for me. And I'm in awe of people who can do that.
Yes. I can totally relate to that as well. Pantsing is so hard for me. I feel like my characters are standing in a room looking at each other going like, what do we do now?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. I have to know where it's going.
Yes. No, I started as a pantser, but I quickly had to rediscover another writing process because I never finished anything because I'd get to like chapter 13 every time. 13 I don't see as an unlucky number, but I would generally get to around chapter 13 and be like, what happens next, let alone in the end? And so I kind of get stuck and it would just like the project would just kind of fizzle away.
Yeah, I totally can understand that.
Yeah. So I like to at least have a goal when I sit down to write as like, this is what I want to do this chapter, whether it's developing relationships between characters, plot devices, whatever needs to happen. But knowing that I don't get that existential dread of staring at the cursor, like what happens. So yeah.
Right. And that makes all the difference.
I can definitely relate.
Yeah.
Plotting is fun.
Yes.
What do you think is the most important part of writing?
So I recently made a TikTok video about this, and it's a thing that I've been thinking about. I think that empathy is actually the most important part of writing, and really the most important part of pretty much anything in life, because I think that understanding other people, whether they're similar to you or very different from you, and understanding what their goals are and what they're trying to do, why they're doing what they're doing, is such an important thing for people in general, but especially for writers when we are dealing with these characters that we've created and we are inhabiting their minds and having to motivate them to do certain things and engage readers with them, make them as believable as possible. I feel like empathy is sort of at the core of what we have to have. We have to be able to put ourselves into these people's experiences and to drive them forward and to make them as real and relatable as possible in order for it to be a good experience for the readers. And so I have been thinking about that a lot lately, actually. So empathy is what I would say is the most important thing to writing, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I love that answer. I always say that reading teaches empathy because, yes, you're putting yourself in someone else's perspective and learning to see from where they are in the world. So I love that answer. I'm curious, how do you get to know your characters to then do all of that?
Yeah, it's really a tough process if it's a brand new character. When I'm writing in my normal series where I have characters established, I can kind of just fall back into those characters and move forward and then introduce new ones. But when I'm writing something that's totally new, that I've created new characters, my outlining process a lot of the time is very plot driven. It's about what happens when and how the story drives forward. But in order for me to write that believably, I have to have that empathy and have that connection with the characters. So usually the very beginning of a project is the hardest part for me because I don't know the characters yet. And I'll start writing, I'll start following the outline, and we'll start trying to do stuff. But it usually takes me a few times. I'll write the first few chapters several times until I really find the characters' voices and figure out really who they are. And it's not, I know a lot of writers will be able to make like a character worksheet that has all the information there. And I do that as well, so I can keep track because I'll forget characters' hair color or eye color or something like that.
Right.
But
yeah.
But I don't really connect with the characters until I have actually tried to write them and have tried to figure out how they're going to go through this scene that they need to be in. And it usually takes a sort of an iterative process. It takes a while and a few tries for me to get through. And at some point, it usually just kind of clicks. There will be a line of dialogue or the way they react to something. I'm like, oh, okay, this is who this person is. This is what they want.
Right.
This is what their personality is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Sure,
So
yeah.
the way that you're describing it reminds me a lot of like some episodes of Doctor Who, where he's a new doctor and he's like, "Oh, am I rude? Like, are these attack eyebrows? Like, oh, I have this accent. That's so cool." Like he's discovering himself as he interacts with other people. Like he uses other people as a mirror to understand himself.
Right.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, I think that's very apt. And I do have some characters who are ginger, so
Yes,
it fits there as well.
they're definitely a favorite of mine as well.
Yes.
Right. So for you, do you definitely start with your outline. So it sounds like your books start more with plot. You develop characters as you go. But do you feel like your stories are more plot driven or more character driven?
Even though I do start with the plot, I feel like characters are the most important aspect of it when you're comparing plot versus characters. I feel like you can have a story that has a weak plot that still turns out to be a really good book as long as it has engaging and believable and relatable characters that you can buy into. And I don't believe that the opposite is as true. I think it's a lot harder to have a good piece of fiction that has a strong plot but really weak characters, because so much of fiction is built on conflict. And when you have conflict, usually it's between multiple characters. Sometimes it could be a character versus themselves, a character versus the environment or something, but there has to be a character at the core of it. And if you don't have that strong character, I feel like you don't really have, even though I do start with my plotting and with the outlining and all of that, I feel like all of that is at the service of the characters that are going to inhabit it later. And if the characters don't come across as genuine, then the rest of it just doesn't really work.
I would agree. Yes, that's a wonderful answer. I think that, plot is very important. Ideally, we'd have both a strong plot and strong characters, but characters are definitely what the reader is going to fall in love with and really connect to. And so it's, like you said, just harder when you have like weaker characters or the too perfect character to, get the reader to really engage and fall in love with
Mhm.
that.
Right.
Not
Yeah,
impossible, but a little hard.
if you don't care about the characters, if you're not engaged with the characters, then like you don't care about the plot. You don't care what happens to them,
Mm-hmm.
what plights they face, or like you just can't. We're humans. We're social. We need to connect. We need to
Yeah.
understand. We need to like them.
Right. And one
Mhm.
thing that I always think is kind of interesting is many writers, including myself, most writers that I know are very introverted. We like having time on our own, and it seems like it makes sense because we have to sit on our own to write and to get these things done.
Mm.
But at the same time, we also have to be experts at like interpersonal relationships
Yeah.
in order to understand this stuff. So it's always kind of a funny dichotomy to me that that most writers I know are kind of solitary creatures, but we have to
Mhm.
observe and know enough to be able to
Mhm.
put ourselves into people's heads and not be that way.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like
Yeah.
introverts, I mean, just speaking for myself, we're observers. We're people
Yeah.
watchers. We're soaking it all in like we're watching a play instead of something that we're supposed to be
Yeah.
engaging with
Yeah.
sometimes. Again, speaking for myself, sometimes I'm like, you should really say something instead
Instead of just staring, yes, at
instead of
everyone
just
smiling.
staring
Yeah.
and with my bucket of popcorn, just
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. I
No,
usually
and it's
can. Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's also kind of funny that a lot of writers are introverts, but we're expected to do the extrovert stuff of marketing and
Yes.
selling in person and engaging in those conversations. It can be kind of antithetical to what we're comfortable with to perform as our author personas.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I call myself kind of an extroverted introvert because
Mhm.
I can go to events, I can speak on panels, I can do book signings and talk with readers, conventions and stuff like that. But it reaches a point where my social battery just runs out, and when it hits,
Yeah.
I know that moment has hit, and I'm like, oh, I'm done.
Yes, no, I'm very notorious for getting a certain look in my eye with my friends, and they're like, "Oh, Julia's about to leave,"
Yes.
because my social battery is just done, and I'm like, "Okay, panic. Now I need to leave,
Yep.
evacuate the situation.
Mhm.
I'm overstimulated or something." I love that. My friends know me so well too.
It's good to know people who know you well enough that they are like, okay, time to pull her out.
Yes.
Right, time to rescue. Yes, no, it's really great because I am kind of an ambivert where similar to you, I can do the extroverted stuff, but I need the introverted time as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's always interesting whenever I do events or talking. I need like 2 days to recover because like the adrenaline crashes and I'm like I pass out a couple hours after the event and the next day I just want to be home recovering.
Yeah,
I always
yeah,
feel like I need that buffer of a couple of days of just being like I need to decompress and de-stress after the big event.
yeah. It's funny. Before we started recording, I mentioned to you that this was perfect timing for me to record with you
Yes.
because I'm at the end of this month going to Dragon Con. I'm going to be there for a full week, and that's the busiest, like the biggest convention that I do. And when I'm there, I do a lot of panels, I do book signing stuff, and all of that. And I'm pretty much on for a solid week. And every day of Dragon Con, I pretty much always have to go in the middle of the day back to my hotel room and take a nap for like an hour or
Yes.
so, just so I can
Yes.
continue through the day. So.
Yeah, I don't blame you. It can be a lot to just be social and be on the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very good thing to know about yourself, that you can go recharge your battery, reset yourself a little bit, and come out refreshed and face the rest of the day instead of trying to like press through
Push
it
through. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and just making yourself miserable. That's
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was
no,
run
that's
through
it's
trial and error.
yes, no, that's great though. I'm all about making accommodations for ourselves, right? We deserve those accommodations and they help us to keep performing the way we need to.
For sure.
All right.
This is one of my favorite questions to ask. So, who is your favorite author and what do you think they do really well?
Yeah, this is a hard question for me because I have the hardest time picking a favorite in anything because it changes just like minute to minute, and I'm always just sort of like cycling through. So I have like a lot of authors that I really like and that I feel like I
Mm-hmm.
get benefits from and that I've learned from and have sort of integrated things into my work. But I don't know that I can pick a single one. But just going through right now, I really am enjoying the what's her name? Lee Bardugo. I'm reading the Grisha books. I have read most of them already, and it's kind of funny because a lot of people, after they read my books, compared my books to hers, to like Shadow and Bone, to Six of Crows, and those books. And I had not read those. I didn't even know about her, and then I started reading them, and I got sucked into it, and I was like, yes, she and I are on the same wavelength. So Lee Bardugo is a big one for me right now. I also, right now, I'm doing a reread of Gideon the Ninth, and I think that book is just amazing. So Tamsin Muir is another one that I would say. Of course, all the big epic fantasy folks that are in the game, like Brandon Sanderson, George R. R. Martin, Joe Abercrombie, Robert Jordan. Who else? Just recently, I started reading Danielle Jensen after she and I became mutuals on TikTok, and I was curious about the Bridge Kingdom, and then I read her newest one, the Fate Inked in Blood. I think she's doing some great stuff. And then I guess going old school, I mentioned that I was into Agatha Christie growing up, and I think I've integrated a lot of her sort of twist storytelling and mystery storytelling into some aspects of my writing. I grew up on Stephen King. Also, The Dark Tower was really formative for me. So I threw a whole bunch of authors at you there instead of just giving you a favorite. But those are some of the ones that I would have sort of in my grouping.
Well, that's
not a problem at all.
okay. It gives us a very good idea of what your tastes are, and a lot of those are pretty well known. We know what their strengths are. They are fantastic storytellers.
Yeah, I am reading pretty much all the time. I'm not a fast reader, and I stay busy, so I don't have a lot of reading time, but I'm always reading something. And so, like right now, I'm reading King of Scars by Lee Bardugo, and I'm doing an audiobook reread of Gideon the Ninth. And so I always, whenever I finish something up, I put something right into the track, and I'm just always, I think of, when I write, I think of it as having like a creative engine that always needs fuel. Yeah. And when I watch a TV show, when I play a video game, when I read a book or anything, it sort of feeds that. That's the fuel that goes into feeding that engine.
Yeah.
Yes.
We talk about the creative well a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it.
Even if it's a different genre than you can still admire, oh, look at how they phrased that. Look at the way they use words. Look at their use of imagery. You can learn something from everyone.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I have so far written all, again, we talked about the different genres, but in the lumped together the fantasy genre, but I read very widely. I read a lot of suspense. I read a lot of mysteries. I read a lot of fantasy of different types, of sci-fi, of horror. And I feel like I learn something from each of those that in some way goes into the stuff that I create.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even just like world building from science fiction and fantasy, relationships from romance, you can learn from every genre how to do something specifically in your story world. That's why I love when people say that they're like big readers. It always kind of like, I have a chip on my shoulder when people are like, oh, I love writing, I'm a writer, but I refuse to read anything. I don't want to be influenced. And I'm like, but wait, like what? What do you mean you don't want to be influenced? Like, influence is the best thing in the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think anybody who thinks they are not being influenced by other stuff, whether it's something they read or something else, I think they are kidding themselves, because nothing, I'm very aware that nothing that I write is wholly original. It's not like I'm creating something out of whole cloth. It's the process that I do isn't just like channeling some divine intervention into my fingers here. It's it's more like taking the input and creating like a tapestry of what I have consumed myself and combining it in a new way.
Yes, no, it's all about, nothing's ever original. It's just about how do I make it new for my readers, for myself, and in my stories. And that has to do a lot with characters, I feel like.
Yeah.
All right. What have you learned from the writing process that you didn't know before you started writing?
Probably the biggest thing that I've learned the skills of consistency and persistence more than anything else, because I always feel like those are two of the biggest things that contribute to writing and finishing a novel. One is you have to consistently show up and put the words down, even when you don't feel like it. You have to be consistent with it and show up and have, it doesn't have to be a formalized schedule, but it needs to be some kind of repetitive thing, because it's a very repetitive process process to get a book put together. And then you have to be persistent with it as well. When you don't feel like it, when you feel like it's going hard, when the work's difficult, you have to push against it and just consistently and persistently press there. And so I feel like those are the two biggest things that I have learned, are to be more consistent and more persistent in chasing goals and nailing that kind of thing down.
Yes, yes. It was Louis L'Amour, I think, who said you have to turn on the faucet for the water to come, about writing in general, of like, if you don't get that flowing ever, then it's going to be very hard to sit down and write.
Yes.
If you're not
That's so true.
if you're not consistently showing up to do that, right? It's a lot harder than, to get into writing mode.
Yeah.
There's that joke of like, if you want your book to be written, you actually have to sit in the chair and do it. Like,
yes,
yeah.
I know, right? All the other things we would rather be doing than writing. I love those memes that are like, oh, I cleaned my house, I deep cleaned, I did the laundry, I did what, and it's like, oh, did you get any writing done? Like, no, we did everything else while procrastinating writing.
I think that it's hard to juggle the responsibilities of life with our deep and utter joy with writing. Like, for me, I don't feel like it's because I don't want to be writing. Like, it's more about like all day my brain is, oh man, I wish I were writing. Oh, I have so many story ideas. Oh, that would be a great thing. And I have to jot those little notes down until I can get down to write. But like, people are busy. We have so much going on. Our society is very complicated, and there isn't a whole lot of downtime. We're very over busy. So for us, it's just about doing our best to prioritize and giving ourselves the time we need to craft and do, tell the stories our heart wants to tell.
Yeah.
Yes. Unfortunately, being an adult means you have 10 things grabbing at your attention at any time. Yes. It can be very difficult. I think that leads very well into the question we usually ask of, how do you find time for writing? How do you prioritize your writing time?
Yeah, so I work from home in general. My other work that I do outside of writing, I think you mentioned at the top, was I do voiceover work, and I do all that from home. And much set my own schedule. I have probably the most routine thing that I do is most days of the week I will go in the morning and do a workout. I have a couple of gyms that I go to, and that provides some structure for me. But other than that, throughout the day, I'm usually just doing work from home. So time for writing usually isn't a huge issue for me. There usually is time. It's more for me about just being able to buckle down and do it and have that inspiration. It's one of those things that it's always so much easier when you have the inspiration to sit down and write. But if you're going to be serious about it and make it a career and write books and everything, you can't just write when you're inspired. You have to be able to sit down and make yourself do it and make yourself write something, even if you don't feel that inspiration. And then later you can edit it into something better. You can make it, if it's something that you wrote that's awful, that's uninspired, then you have the faith that later you can edit it. So for me, it's less, I have plenty of time to write, but it's more about just getting myself to sit down and actually do it. And sometimes that's the challenge, is just being able to force my butt into the seat, my hands on the keyboard, and just get the words out.
I really like writing sprints for that reason, because there's like, not only is there the built-in accountability of, at the end of this sprint, I have to tell you how many words I write. It just like forces me out of the procrastination of like, okay, we're doing a writing sprint at this time. I'm gonna at least get those words down for the day. That's what has worked really well for me when it comes to like getting books written. Have you seen the website forthewords.com? I have heard about it, but I have not used it. Is that the one where does it delete your words though if you're not fast enough?
I think that's a different one. That feature might be on this one, but this one is one that gamifies word sprints. You start off, and it's like a role playing game. You make a character, and then you go on quests, and it has monsters that you fight and different things that you do. And each of the monsters has, for example, a number of words associated with it and a number of minutes associated with it. And you have to sit there and type into the interface. And if you type that number of words within the time limit, then you defeat that monster. And you get your loot for it. And the whole time you're like going through and you're actually writing your manuscript, but it gamifies it to the point that you feel like you're just playing a role-playing game. And so I use
Nice.
that
Yeah.
for my writing sprints, and it's been very effective.
Oh, that sounds
No.
fantastic. Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna definitely have to check that out.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
for the words,
yeah.
just the number 4 and thewords.com.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'd heard of the idea of it, but I've heard of a couple of different ones, and I know there's one that if you stop writing, it'll start to delete your words, and then like that horrifies me because I'm like,
Yeah.
what if I need a bathroom break or something, and they're just gone, you know?
Oh
Yeah,
no, yeah. With my
that one's-
memory, those words would be gone forever. I'm not getting those back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're never coming back. Yeah. So
That sounds
no,
horrifying.
yeah, that sounds a lot of fun. The For the Words one, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have a favorite part of writing?
For the actual process of writing, I really enjoy the early part when everything is really malleable and sort of ephemeral. It's before I start nailing things down with the outline and have the draft there to edit and all that. I like sort of the ideation phase where I can brainstorm things, just sort of play with the story more and have more free reign with it. I think that part's really fun. And with the overall process, after the book has come out and people have read it, I love hearing from readers who have read the book and enjoyed it and really got what I was trying to do with it. And they tell me they either will leave a review or they'll message me somewhere, or I'll meet them at a convention. And getting to find out that I have connected with somebody in the way that I hoped I would is really the best part.
It's amazing, yes, when you get feedback from your readers and they're like, I love this character, I love that part of your book. Like it is really reaffirming and validating for sure.
Yes.
Oh, I live for reader comments.
Yes,
I love them so much. Like just somebody highlighting a quote and being like, I love this will just make my day.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I love that.
I know they say this about like humor writing, but I think it's true about any writing. Like you write this joke into a book and then you have to wait months, if not years, to see if anyone gets the joke in the end. And I feel like writing is a lot of that, where we're pouring ourselves into our books, and then it's just like, but you have to wait forever to see if it connects with the reader the way that you intended it to. But when you do get that feedback, you're just like, yes, it did. Yeah. That's amazing.
What's really fun is when they've made a connection that you really didn't mean to put in there.
Right.
They're like, I love how you did this. It connects, and you're like, oh, it does. Oops. Like, yes, I mean, of course, I meant that the whole time. You're very astute.
Right. Yeah.
I've enjoyed sort of playing with that a little bit with my book, Akathar's Greatest Trick, that came out, which is the first full novel in my series. A lot of people read that and would give me feedback, and I would hear from. One thing that I heard from was one particular character was a lot of people's favorite character that I didn't anticipate that, but she was my favorite character too, but I didn't expect for her to connect that well with everyone else. And so when I found out that she did, I was working on a prequel novella that I was going to use to give away for free to people who sign up for my newsletter and do that kind of thing. And she wasn't going to be the main feature in that story, but I made sure to work her into that story in a really sort of goofy role. Yeah, after getting the feedback. And then the flip side of that that's kind of funny is in my series, there is a lot of mystery. There's a lot of stuff that's unknown and sort of mysterious stuff going on. And I started, after the first book came out, I started hearing theories from people about what things meant and what was going on. And I already had mapped out how the whole series was going to go, so I knew I already know what everything means throughout. But hearing the theories that were wrong were really interesting to me, and I made sure to sort of play those up in the next book and make it sort of lean in that direction, make people think more that maybe that's what was going on, and then I would kind of pull the rug out from under them and be like, nope, not that. so that kind of thing has been fun.
Yeah. No, it is fun. I know a lot of authors will put like Easter eggs from other stories into new stories as well, so that it can be very fun to play with things like that in your story world for your readers, like little gifts for them to make those connections. Yeah, no, that is so fun. I think your mystery influence is going to be really helpful for that as well, of just like being able to work in those little twists all of that stuff in the background for
Yeah.
your readers to have those theories. That's very fun.
I love doing that kind of thing. And one of the biggest things that I've learned about doing twists is that when you do a twist, it needs to be more predictable than you would like to think. In order for it to be a good twist, it needs to be something that could be anticipated, and that when the reader goes back and thinks about it, they're like, oh, of course it happened that way. That was inevitable. It had to happen.
Right.
And I feel like it's less important for it to be a shock. Like a lot of people, when they think of twists, they think that it has to be something that just comes out of nowhere and is a big shock. And I feel like it's more important that it's something that happens as a course of action. It's what had to happen that makes sense in the story. But through the way you tell the story, you maybe have the reader looking at your left hand while your right hand's doing the other thing.
Yes. You got to have your main characters get it wrong.
Yeah.
Something happens, they think it's one thing. They take your reader with them in those assumptions. But when the twist happens, the readers go, "Oh, I should have seen that coming."
Yeah. I love doing that.
They have to kind of look and go, I don't think that they're right about that. Like,
having unreliable narrators is such a useful tool for that.
Yes.
Right.
It is very important to put down those breadcrumbs, because when you have a twist that wasn't properly foreshadowed, it just makes your readers angry.
Yep.
Yes, nothing more infuriating than being like, where were the clues to this? Because it wasn't foreshadowed at all.
It's like cheating. Like, you can't do that. You need to make this a game.
Yep. And you can see I have my board game collection behind me. I enjoy the games.
Yes. Yes, I was admiring that earlier.
Yeah.
So, do you have a least favorite part of writing?
I don't really enjoy the editing process that much. It's something that I feel like is essential, and it turns the story into the book that I want it to be. So I appreciate it. I don't enjoy editing, but really my least favorite part is probably actually releasing the book, because it's this point that after I've been writing and working on this really personal project for a series of months or even years, and I finally reach the point where it's finished. I've done everything that I can do to make it as good as possible. It's gone through all the phases of everything, and it's time to put it out there. Then it's time to show this really personal thing to the world and put it out there specifically for it to be judged. And it's such a vulnerable thing, and it's a thing that even if I feel good about the book, which I always do when I put the book out, I wouldn't if I didn't, but there's always this period of doubt when you put it out there. You think, well, what if I'm wrong? What if the readers don't connect with it? What if I get all 1-star ratings and this is the end of everything? And
I think a lot of us suffer from imposter syndrome, for sure. I know I'm constantly asking myself, like, how many books are in me? Do I have another story in me to tell? Things like that. Like, it's something that I feel a lot of us really struggle with. And you're right, it's so vulnerable, putting yourself and your book out there for the whole world to see and then criticize and judge. And so it does take a lot out of us. But, I think it's good that, we're all still doing it despite our imposter syndrome, and we're still publishing our books and putting it out into the world.
Right.
I'm always like, read my books, but don't tell me you read them.
But like Jason said, we're introverts. We don't like putting ourselves out there. We don't like being judged. We don't like showing that vulnerability. It's the hardest thing we can do is to open up and share something so personal, but we also can't help it. We have to, like, we
there's this compulsion that drives us to keep doing this,
and we put it out there and just wait for the stars. Wait for the stars to fall.
It's all about the storytelling, and if you don't tell the story to someone, then it doesn't get told. So.
Yes. No, I love that. I always tell everyone, like, congratulations when they've written a book, because it's one of the hardest things you can do. So be very proud, celebrate every victory, and keep going, because you got to keep yourself going somehow.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. We've talked a little bit about different authors that influence your writing, but are there any other aspects of life that influences your writing?
Yeah, I really think it's just everything. I think that pretty much everything I do, and I feel like this is probably true of most authors, that just everything we do, any media we consume, any things we do, podcasts we listen to, news that we see, or things that we hear about, all feed into that, become fuel for that creative engine, like I was talking about. And I'm very aware now. I don't think I previously was as aware, but over the last few years, have become more aware that whenever I'm listening to a speech, or reading a book, whatever it is, or even playing a video game, watching a TV show, all of that stuff, I can feel it kind of just coming in and contributing to the creativity that is going to get sort of reprocessed, and my brain's going to stitch things together in ways that I wouldn't consciously think of. And all of that influences the writing. It comes out as like this combined product that's very different from what it started out as, but I'm aware now that it's just this mixture of everything that I consume, whether it's podcasts or news, probably more news than I would would like to have contributing to it. But
Right.
but it comes from everywhere. I feel like it's just like a nonstop input that contributes.
Yeah. So do you find yourself being more selective about what you're consuming, therefore, which because that's going into this kind of soup that's making your news story?
Yeah, sometimes I feel like if I'm in the mood for a certain type of story, like I am writing something right now that I'll get into that in a bit, but I wanted to read something similar to that, so I started specifically seeking out some books that were similar to that to see what other people had done. And I benefited from that, but then also I feel like the things that really benefit me are almost like the random things that have nothing to do with it, that come in, that those are the connections that make stories unique. The things that you'll be reading a book about Vikings, and then suddenly you hear something about the modern economy and what's going on with Wall Street or something, and you make some brain connection that you'd never thought of before, and you're like, oh, well, I can do this now. So I feel like just those random things that aren't even targeted sometimes can be even more helpful than the things that you pinpoint, that you try to feed into yourself.
Right. No, I think that's true, because it's like braiding with different yarn, or making a collage, like those random pieces that are going to fit in somehow to make it unique.
Right.
There are always going to be those random things, though, that you have to somehow find naturally.
Yeah. Yeah.
The metaphor in my head was like, oh, like when you're digging and you find a shiny rock and you're like, ooh, this is a good one.
Yeah.
Yes,
This
right.
is a good one. I can
Amongst
use
all the
this one.
graphite
And you
the
have just the
concrete,
right
you find
place
a
to
shiny
put
one.
that shiny little rock of information, and it just fits your picture.
And occasionally you find a little nugget of gold in there too.
Yes.
Yes, or feldspar. All right.
All right. Do you ever get writer's block, and how do you deal with it?
Okay, so I've had people get mad at me for saying this before, but I don't actually get writer's block. I don't have a problem with that, because I have so many. I was talking about, I have so many ideas constantly coming to me, and then I outline stuff when I'm actively working on a project. So when I'm at the end of one project, I always pretty much know what the next one's going to be, because I've been thinking about that idea and letting it percolate. And then when I'm in the middle of a project, I have everything outlined, so I know when I sit down what I need to do for that. So I never get stuck like that. But I do go through periods of low motivation. I go through periods where it's harder for me to have that persistence and that consistency that I was talking about, that are so essential. It will be things that maybe something else is going on in life, or I'm busy with something else, or I've gotten hooked on some new video game that's taking my attention, or maybe I've been sick, or something happens to just make me have less motivation to sit down and write. And when I have that, I've tried different techniques to try to raise that motivation, and it's kind of funny. The thing that's worked for me the most lately, I'm not a very like out there kind of person, as far as relying on a lot of like outside kind of mystical kind of stuff, or a lot of people call it like the woo woo kind of thing. But a friend of mine who's an author, Emily Blackwood, got me started thinking about, she's really big into the manifestation kind of thing, and she got me to read a couple of books about that. And there's a lot of sort of mystical stuff about that I don't really buy into, but I do believe that a lot of that comes from your subconscious, that a lot of that is your brain processing things and motivating you to do things that that you wouldn't otherwise have the motivation to do. And so through sort of playing tricks on my subconscious and doing technically some of that manifestation kind of stuff, I've been able to motivate myself to be more consistent and persistent and get through those low motivation times.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. I think that a lot of times, like what we're putting our thoughts and feelings into, we're giving that kind of energy into the universe of, like, whether that's thoughts that we're not going to do the thing or we're going to fail somehow. I feel like that there is a little bit of that, what you fear you create, because you are putting that energy into the world, right? And so that's the, I think the idea behind manifestation is, rather than putting that worried energy out, you're putting out the energy of, like, I got it already.
That's great. That's perfect.
Yeah, even if you don't buy into the whole thing, it's still very motivating and very inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that you've made it work for you. Yeah, no, that's great that you've taken this part. This is the kernel of truth for me in this, and that's what I feel like works. And I'm going to use it to kind of hack my subconscious and be like, we're going to be more motivated because, that's what we're focusing on. So I love that.
And I think that is important with a lot of different kinds of advice and with lots of different kinds of things that you learn, that the overall thing, the overall lesson might not be completely applicable or something that you can sort of swallow whole. But I think there's something valuable that you can usually glean from it, that there's a reason it works for people. And if you can target why it works for them and see if there's some angle that you can get in that would work for you, then you can sort of reverse engineer it into working for you.
No, I agree completely. The purpose or the intent behind why they give the advice is oftentimes more valuable than the actual advice itself, because, like you're saying, you can tweak it for how will this work for me?
Right.
I love that. Mm-hmm.
What would you say has been your most significant writing victory so far?
As far as the writing itself, just finishing anything, honestly, that's such a huge thing. I don't know how accurate it is. I've read in many places, so I kind of tend to believe it myself, that of people who start writing a book, that only 3% actually finish the first draft. And that sounds legit to me. So just finishing anything feels huge to me. But as far as my most significant victory, I think it would be outside of the writing, sort of at a meta level, is really just being able to build the kind of community that I've been able to build through social media, and be able to find the kind of friends and followers that I found, especially on TikTok, but elsewhere, and just to build up those platforms. And it's given me the opportunity to meet so many amazing people and go to so many events, meet fellow authors, to meet readers, and to be just part of that passionate community, and to speak on panels, and to take part in things like this podcast right here. These kinds of opportunities wouldn't have come along if I had not been fortunate enough to find the kind of people and surround myself with the kind of people that I have. And so I feel like being able to build that community is really what my biggest victory has been.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You are definitely one of my more favorite TikTok creators, personalities.
I appreciate that so much.
Yeah, I very much enjoy your TikToks. So I was absolutely stoked when you agreed to be on the show.
Oh, I'm honored, and I am so glad to be here talking with you. And like I said, I enjoy talking and interacting, all that stuff, and that's what the, I guess, sort of extroverted part of my extroverted introvert thing is. And so this means so much to me, like interacting and being able to share and talk shop and do this kind of thing is so great.
Well, writing can be pretty isolating. And this is definitely one of me and Julia's favorite parts of our week, is to talk about books and writing with other people.
Well, I'm so glad you're doing it. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. All right. One last question, one of my favorites, and you kind of have addressed this a little bit with finding the kernels of truth and all the advice, but is there advice you hate, either because you feel like broad stroke or doesn't apply to everyone, or is just crappy advice?
Yeah, so it's more a genre of advice, and I think it's been brought on a lot by social media. It's
Yeah.
a lot easier to go viral with videos or with advice or with content where you're very definitive about things, where you sound like you're shaming someone for doing something a certain way or for not
Yes,
doing it a
right.
certain way, and telling people that they either have to do it this way or that they can't do it that way, and just being very absolute about something. I feel
Yeah.
like there are so many different ways to write a book and so many different ways to publish a book. There are so many paths to that that there is no one right way. Once you figure out what you're doing and how you're doing it, there certainly are best practices that you can follow to try to do it. But any kind of advice that says never use adverbs, or you have to publish traditionally, or you have to
Mhm.
get an agent doing this kind of thing, like those kinds of things feel very false to me. And when I hear
Mhm.
people say them, they sound to me like they come from a place of insecurity, where the person is more interested in getting views than in sharing knowledge. And that's
Right.
my least favorite kind of advice, because it feels very self-serving to the person who is giving the supposed advice, and it doesn't help anyone.
Yes, especially when it's like somebody who's new to book talk that just like comes on first or second video and they're like, "Said is dead," or
Yeah.
something so definitive where they're like, "You can only use that or you can't ever use that," and it's just like,
Yep.
explore the place a little before we come up with these like bold
Yeah.
opinions and all of that stuff, because it's just like, yeah, these are conversations that have been had a lot in the writing community and stuff like that, and to come out with those like blanket statements of like never do this or always do that is
Yeah.
it's very frustrating. I feel
Yeah.
it
It's
can be very frustrating for us. Yeah.
it's
Yes.
it's it's frustrating when it comes from a newcomer who maybe doesn't know the community
Mm-hmm.
and hasn't tested the water. I feel like the bigger part of that also is people who have been around and who do know the community and have grown a big following, and they've gotten a big following.
Yeah.
They start doing that, and usually there's a price tag attached to that, and there's something
Right.
really
Okay.
insidious about that. And I feel like they are kind of preying on the newcomers that come in, because
Right.
they'll have this big they'll have like 60,000 followers, 80,000 followers,
Mm-hmm.
something, and somebody sees that and they see that as a sign of authority, which I don't think it is.
Right.
I think that the size of a following is largely up to luck. And
Yes. Yes.
so they'll see that and they'll believe what the person's saying. And for one thing, they will give their money to that person, and they don't check to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that whatever claim the person is making, they have actually done and replicated themselves. Um,
Right.
if
Right.
somebody's saying, I know exactly how you can get a literary agent, I'll tell you exactly how to do it, and you'll have a best-selling book from this, then you should go and look and see if that person actually has multiple best-selling books, if they have a process
Mm-hmm.
that they've actually put into action themselves. If they don't, then be very suspicious of that. And I think
Right.
that
Where's this
kind of,
formula coming from? Right.
yeah, yeah, that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
advice I think is very insidious, and I think it's smart to have a wary eye towards anything. Like I give a lot of advice myself on my TikTok and in my
Mm-hmm.
platforms. I don't charge for any of it, but even at that, I always encourage people never to take what I say at face value, because advice is not
Mm-hmm.
universal, and if something I say
Right.
is different from what works for them, then they should do what works for them for sure, and should just ignore me.
No, and that's why we love talking about the writing process, because we say all the time there's as many ways to write as there are writers who write.
Yeah.
And just because it doesn't work for me or it doesn't work in theory, if it's working for you and you're finishing stories and you're getting them done and they're satisfying to you, then
Yeah.
it's working for you. And so you can do whatever you need to do as long as you're getting those stories finished.
Right.
Yes. A
Yeah.
lot of people will listen to that advice and they'll be like, oh, I'm no good at plotting. I must not be a very good writer. There's no way I can write a book. Or there
Yeah.
might be people who are like, I just can't sit down and write. I have to have an outline. And they'll be like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just not a very good writer. I'm not as good as that other person. And, no, we have to bring out that we're very diverse. We're creative people. We don't fit inside boxes. We go off the rails. We do our own thing.
Mhm.
And we have to, because we don't want to be creating books that are all the same.
Mhm.
We
Right.
need
Yeah.
really weird new things to chow down on to read.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yes. And I hate when people are like, don't ever use passive voice or don't ever use adverbs. I'm like, these are parts of the language that function in a certain
Right.
way and have a purpose. And, or when people misunderstand common advice where they're like, oh, we can't use passive voice, so get rid of all the was in your story. I'm like, what about he was running through the woods? That's not passive voice and uses was. Like,
Right.
let's not forget that it's a grammar structure to use was,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
and verb.
Yeah.
So,
It,
yeah.
Yeah, any kind of those blanket statements I just ignore, and I think that anything that somebody says never do this, I think that kind of sounds like a challenge to me to find when it's
Yes,
good to
right.
do that.
Right. Well, even with like showing and telling, there are times to tell. Like we don't want to read about somebody getting in their car, starting their car, driving to the location, parking, all this stuff. Like that's not interesting. So I mean, like any good adage to writing, there's always the exception to the rule. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And I really appreciate you kind of warning new authors to be suspicious, to not trust everyone. There are a lot of sharks in the water. There are a lot of people just waiting in the wings to prey upon you in your dreams.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
Because your dream is to get this book published, and they know that, and they're going to be
do
able
whatever
to
it
pinpoint
takes.
you. Yeah.
And they'll tell you, no, you have to spend $5,000 on my very special program, on my author coaching and my edits, because, you know, because I'm the way. This is the only way. You're not going to do it without me. You know, and you can't give too much power to other people to make your dream happen. Yeah.
That said, there are some legit courses that are paid courses out there, but I have paid for courses that have ended up the way that you're describing, that I definitely have buyer's remorse. And I would say, just with any course, don't write it off out of hand just because it's a paid course, but look into it. And the most important thing is to see if the person who's teaching the course has the experience, and most importantly, has been able to do whatever they're trying to teach more than once. Because one time maybe they stumbled into something, they don't really understand how or why they did it, and they got lucky. But if they've done it twice or 3 times or 4 times, they probably do have a process that works. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, read reviews, read customer testimonials for things like that, and make sure that you're just protecting yourself. If it is money that you can't afford to lose, don't invest in those things. Yeah. We want to give you the chance to let our audience know where they can find out more about your books online. So here's the time to share your socials and your website.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on my biggest social presence is probably on TikTok. I'm also on Threads and Instagram and all those places. I am Jason Dorough, author, on all those places. Just my name and author. My website is just myname.com. It's jasondorough.com. And then for everything else that I have going on, I have a link tree that is just the Linktree / my name, Jason Dorough. And it'll have links to all that stuff, plus anything else special that I have going on. Like if I have events coming up, I'll do book pre-orders through that. And we'll have any kind of special links that I rotate in and out. So those are the best places to find me. Probably TikTok and Threads are the places that I update the most frequently.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolutely fabulous conversation with you tonight. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it so much and appreciate being part of the show.
Of course.
Yes, we loved it. And thank you to everyone who's listening along at home. Remember, there's more than one way up a mountain. And if you're our next episode airs Friday as usual. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, you can find us on social media at The Tell Not Show, or email us at thetellnotshow@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach, and can be found at hijingsrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to 4, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks, and see you next time.